another manager goes down. It's the Just Baseball show. It is Wednesday, June 8th, and Joe Maddon is no longer the manager of the LA Angels, Peter.
It's shocking to me personally. This is a guy in Joe Maddon who took the Tampa Bay Devil Rays and brought them to the American League pennant, won them a pennant, got them to the World Series, didn't end up winning a ring. But if you saw the Devil Rays before he got there, what an achievement. I think he had 6 consecutive winning seasons between 2008 and 2013. Then he goes to Chicago and breaks in a 108-year drought. And we saw comments, on our TikTok that, Joe Maddon got lucky with a crazy talented roster in Chicago. And with all due respect, I think that's just incorrect. From what I saw him do a bang up job with a team that hadn't won a World Series in a century and change. And then what does he do? He goes to the Los Angeles Angels. And it's always, if not now, when, right? They have all this talent. But when you look at a regular Angels roster in June, in July, it's not filled with the Anthony Rendones and the Mike Trouts even, or the Jared Walshes, or all of these stars. It's continuous injuries to this team that have made them a 500 ball club. Finally, they're healthy. Finally, they start winning. Then Anthony Rendon goes down. Taylor Ward goes down. They have a couple pitchers who aren't performing, and the bullpen has not been good. They lose 12 in a row, and now he's out. Yeah. Seems criminal to me, Aram.
We're going to get a little bit more into that, and I think you summed it up really, really well. We're going to do some mock trades, which is super fun. Kind of trades we like to see is the way I want to frame it, because we're not trying to predict the future here, but we're making mock trades that we think are realistic, but more so things that we would like to see that would make the season more fun. So we're going to do that, and that's going to be really fun on here. I know people love that, but to build off of your point with Joe Maddon, man, I look at what is going on with the Angels. And we've said, this is probably the best roster that the Angels have had in a long time, maybe since Trout first came up. And it is really frustrating to watch what this team has done in terms of spiraling over the last dozen games. But I really do wonder if something happened behind the scenes, because you lay it out well. Joe Maddon's one of the most well-liked, as far as I know, well-respected guys in the game. Yes, he's a little bit outside the box, but he has won a World Series. He has done it in a small market. He's done it in a big market. And you could talk about a great Cubs roster. You know how many good Cubs rosters there were in that century where they didn't win anything? There were some bad ones. Don't get me wrong. There were some really bad ones, but there were some really good ones. The curse almost becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And Joe Maddon's ability to usually be able to just kind of get the clubhouse right, that's always been what he is, a player's manager, is why he's had a job for so long. And I wonder if he is just a little bit dated. That's the only justification I can think of here is, maybe he can't align with the players as much anymore. I just thought it was surprising because I think Perry Minasian and general managers doing a great job. They've built pitching depth. Their organization looks good. Their rotation is the best it's looked in a while. They've got guys like Taylor Ward coming up, Brandon Marsh, all these dudes. And not all of it is Minasian, but a lot of it is. And I just think it's so quick to pull the trigger. This is not the same as the Phillies, right? We saw them get off to a great start. Then the Angels slowed down. I think this is a very different situation from the Phillies. And I think Girardi got scapegoated too. But I think this situation with Maddon was even more shocking to both of us, right?
I think you're totally spot on there. Both scapegoated. Did Girardi deserve to be fired? What could Girardi have done with this Phillies roster to make them better than exactly? Hit them ground balls at midnight to 4 a.m. so they can defend. Maybe that way he could have helped them out. That was obviously sarcastic. Then with Joe Maddon and the Angels, what could he have done? Have you seen some of these Angels lineups lately? They're not that great.
Was 0 for 28. I mean,
what is he supposed to do? What is he supposed to do there? What is he supposed to do? And to Angels fans' credit who don't like him, Joe Maddon has had some weird bullpen management type things. He's screwed with Rossiel Iglesias a little bit. He's been up and down. I think he's put him in some bad situations. I think he's used Aaron Loop in some weird situations that didn't really make sense to me. So he's not perfect. We're not here to say that he's a perfect manager and they made the worst mistake in the world. But Joe Maddon said it himself. He interviewed with Ken Rosenthal directly after he was fired and said that he was basically just kind of floored by the entire thing and that he sees that the Angels and a lot of these organizations, they're so fully analytics. And he said it himself. He's like, I like analytics. Like, it's not a bad thing. I use them, but it can't be the end all be all. Kind of like what we say about these sorts of things, that analytics are an incredible tool and can help you be better and should not be shunned. But at the same time, it's not the answer to the question. The answer to the question is not in the numbers. You have to have guys like Joe Maddon in your dugout. It's working right now with a guy like Buck Showalter. Like if Buck Showalter was on the Angels, would they be worse? Would they be better? I don't know. They'd probably be in the same exact situation they are now. We say this all the time about managers, dude.
Yeah, it's funny. You bring up the analytics and like the idea of, and I think it's an important point to think direction wise. I think about when Mike Schilt, parted ways with the Cardinals, and the quote that always stuck in my head was just philosophical differences. That just echoed in my head. I'm like, what does that even mean? And it really can only boil down to that, right? And I think when you have Perry Minasian putting together this roster, it seems like to me that you look at the way that Maddon has managed the roster, and it wasn't the way that Minasian had imagined the roster being managed. When he put it together, I think it was, I want Iglesias closing every game out in the ninth, or maybe he doesn't want that. Maybe he wants something else. Maybe he wanted Loop in certain situations. So, I think about, and I never reference Moneyball to a real life situation, but something that I do think resonates and is very real was
get on base.
You remember in Moneyball, what would you say?
Get on base.
Get on base. Well, yes, that is helpful. That is a good start. And like the other thing too is like, I look at Billy Beane almost trying to go at it with the manager at the time. I forget who the name was of the manager at the time, but saying like, play this guy, and he wouldn't do it. And to the point where he ends up trading some dudes so that he ends up being forced to play the guys that he wants. So you can see that's very common, where you have the GM and the manager having two different perceptions here. And ultimately Perry Minasian was brought in to rebuild this whole thing and kind of build this team up in a different manner. And I think, he's going to have a little bit more staying power than Joe Maddon, unfortunately. And that's what happens here. I'm very curious to see if Joe Maddon lands somewhere else, where he lands on the coaching carousel, because I think there's a lot of other job openings that could be happening. We're going to talk about the Marlins briefly before we get into, this mock trade episode. And, the Marlins are spiraling not only, on the record department, but also in just the clubhouse department. Craig Mish reported today that they had a 90-minute meeting in the clubhouse behind closed doors, and it didn't go over that well. Even when you asked Don Mattingly after after the interview or after the discussion, basically they asked him, hey, how did it go? Do you think it was productive? And he couldn't say yes. He couldn't say that it was productive. And Sandy Alcantara said to Craig Mish afterwards too, hey, players aren't always going to get along. And that's very alarming. And that always goes back to the manager as well, even though sometimes it's out of his control. Do the Marlins have an opening coming up soon? And Don Mattingly is another more old school guy that I know Marlins fans don't like for the most part. I think there's some that want to see him stay around, but a lot want to see him go. And I'd argue that the Marlins are not in a position to win either, but maybe Mattingly's not helping it. So you look across the game, and I think every manager situation is very different, but I do always feel like we attribute way too much responsibility to managers.
Dude, I think you're totally right. Like, how Yankee fans were hating Aaron Boone? I've heard zero. I've heard
now
nothing.
He's the best ever, right?
Now he's the best ever, right? You hear about it all the time. Dave Roberts, even with the Dodgers, like when the Dodgers are in a little bit of a sputtering, it's a Dave Roberts problem. Nope. When they win, not Dave Roberts' problem. That's the thing. It's when your team is playing bad, you just look to the manager and you're like, he must be the problem. But when they're winning, no one's pointing to anything. They're pointing to the players. They're pointing to Aaron Judge. And then just to wrap up again, so I just wanted to make that quick point of to kind of help everybody realize that you only point at your manager when they're bad, not when they're good. Nobody's pointing at Aaron Boone right now. Now, if the Marlins had got off to this great start, nobody would be pointing at Don Mattingly, even though Don Mattingly hasn't had much success down there in Miami. But Phil Nevin is now replacing Joe Maddon. Do you know how many years Phil Nevin has been a manager for? You're
0.
holding up the 0 for all the people on YouTube. 0. He coached with the Yankees. He coached with the Giants.
Didn't he wave too many guys home?
Is this now like the guy who's going to get you out of the 12-game win streak? And it's funny. There's actually a crazy stat. I'm not sure exactly it, but I know it's crazy positive. The game after you let your manager go, you always win. They always win.
And we saw
Like
with the
Georgia,
Phillies.
we saw with the Phillies, they won 3 in a row off Girardi. My thinking is we're recording this on Tuesday to release on Wednesday. They'll win tonight. Like
You think they're taking? You think they're
yeah,
scoring
they'll
to
win
break the
tonight.
losing
It's
streak?
Garrett Whitlock versus Reed Detmers. Red Sox definitely should win. Manager Mojo. I bet the Angels win.
That is like the most lock Red Sox win, and
It's weird.
it is weird how that works. And then everyone goes, "See, it was the manager. That's exactly what it was." And
that's what we're doing in our comments on TikTok about Joe Girardi and the managers. Like, oh, it wasn't Joe Girardi's fault, and then people are like, "Well, we're 3-0 since we won."
Yeah.
Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It just happens that you won that game. That doesn't mean that Joe Girardi was the problem. That's the point of my whole rambling, yelling.
Yeah. And I want to wrap up on the Marlins situation because I think that, apparently the reports are, again, that Craig Mish keeps saying that Don Mattingly is not on the hot seat. But now you're having 90-minute meetings and they're not really productive. And, I don't even know what the rift is or who is, the catalyst of the rift. That's something that the players are keeping within closed doors. Craig Mish, whether he was told or not, is playing it off like he was not, he doesn't know. So it's either between Craig Mish and the Marlins or just the Marlins. And the way I look at it there though, is when you play poorly, things come to a head a bit more, obviously. And that's where the Marlins are at. But they've also brought in some bigger personalities. Jorge Soler, obviously El Garcia, who, has some conspiracy theories swirling on him and that have been corroborated to some degree from when his days in Detroit. And then Jazz Chisholm is a young player who is a lightning rod. And, I don't know if his approach resonates with everybody as well. I love what he does on the field, but you got to imagine it could get old in the clubhouse a little bit. And, I do wonder what's going on in there because they do have leaders like Miguel Rojas and Jacob Stallings and things like that. So I wonder if Don Mattingly it ends up, maybe being on the hot seat here if things go poorly. And the last thing that really got me a little bit confused was that usually those meetings galvanize your team. And Don Mattingly said, I wouldn't be surprised if they came out flat today. And they're playing right now as we speak. And that is a concerning comment. I think they're going to come out flat. That's not really what you want to hear. And what's the score? You're making a positive face.
They are up 5-0 in the middle of the third against Yohan Adon.
It is Yohan Adon.
It is Yohan Adon. So, you got to Jazz Chisholm, grand slam, 402 feet.
No way.
Yes, sir.
So winning is the best medicine, and we'll see what happens there. But, I do wonder where a lot of these teams go because you see Mike Schilt. They bring in, now Ollie Marmol, totally young guy, totally different. Phil Nevin gets promoted here. We'll see who they end up bringing in, or if Nevin ends up being the guy. I bet you they go the young route. So it is interesting because you bring up Buck Showalter and the older route seems to be working there. And I do just wonder if the disconnect always gets emphasized more when the team's not as good. Like if the Mets were struggling, Buck Showalter would be this dinosaur that we don't like. And I do wonder how much of just the struggles make these things come to a head. So managers in baseball might be one of the weirdest, and it's good to talk about. We just spent the first half of the podcast doing it, but it's also one of those where I feel like we have the conversation and I still don't know where we're at on it. And that's
Gabe Kapler goes from Philly to San Francisco, wins with San Francisco, but is now struggling. Is he a good manager? Buck Showalter's been fired a couple times. Let's not forget that. All of these guys, it's all a crapshoot in my mind. Not to diminish the role of a manager, because the role of the manager is really important. My thinking is, and this has been my thinking now for years, how much with the new age of analytics are these managers actually managing? And I think it's coming to a head with a lot of the older guys where it's let me do my job instead of saying this guy's WRC plus against lefties that throw this and his slider, this is the guy we have to play. But then you're like, that guy hasn't gotten a hit in a week.
Yeah.
Why is he? No, this guy has been playing way better. He should get the role. He feels more confident. The other guy, he slept bad on the plane. All of these different things have to come together to make the ultimate team. Absolutely. And the teams that are bickering in the middle are not doing well.
I'm with you. And there is that human component. And I think nobody has a better feel for the roster and for the team and how guys are doing than the manager. So I do like the idea of giving your manager as much information as possible. This guy hits really well against lefties. This guy crushes this reliever. So if he comes in, bring him off the bench, things like that. Absolutely. But at the end of the day, the manager knows what guys are dealing with, what guys are going through, how they're feeling that day, what's going on. And you have to kind of trust the captain to steer the ship. And I think we have teams across the board with different philosophies on that. And if the manager isn't willing to buy in on, hey, you don't really control everything, then, guys like Joe Maddon are just going to be forced out unless they find a team like the Mets that I think are letting Buck Showalter do his thing. That's the thing. I think the Mets are letting Buck Showalter do his thing because that's what Steve Cohen wanted. And it seems to be working so far. I think either way can work, but it's got to be full buy-in. It's got to be all analytics all the way from the top and do it all the time. And I think there's holes in that. And you can do all feel, all manager all the time. And I think there's holes in that. It's really tough. You got to find the right balance of it all, but you got to buy into it.
Wasn't the problem with the Mets last year the fully bought in 100% analytics?
Yes.
And the guys just couldn't play. They felt locked up the entire time. Yeah. And now they let Buck Showalter make some of the moves. Look what's happening. Like, this isn't rocket science here.
Yeah, it's the balance, right? And these guys are still using a lot of advanced information, but they're not going analysis paralysis here. And there was some really good pieces on
analysis
that
paralysis. I like that.
I like
that.